station. They told them that go and make new children and forget about these ones. And I mean,
well, Majid, then why isn't there a Western intervention into Bahrain then?
Well, I think Syria is a strategically important country. If any political change in Syria would reverberate across the region, I think we can't just go inside a country and change the head of states. And
well, that's what the U.S. has been doing for at least a decade. The U.S. has been doing that for at least a decade, if not longer.
Well, I just want to add a point personally. I mean, I mean, you can make an argument if Syria is a danger to other countries, but definitely it's danger for its own people. I personally lived in that country. I know the political separation in that country and what the people are going through now. And how can if I can ask your guest, how can he explain the thousands of Syrian people who are being killed, their life being sacrificed? How can he say to them that this is not an uprising, and this is all like what the Syrian regime maintained the line. This is all conspirators and Western-backed terrorists.
Stephen, you want to jump in there before we go to the break?
Oh, it absolutely is Western-backed. And America, Carl, America has a very clear purpose in what it's doing. And again, this was planned many, many years ago. The purpose is regime change. America tolerates no independent regimes. All of the countries that America goes to war against and the ones it plans to go to war against are independent governments that are not one-sidedly.
All right, Stephen, I have to jump in here. Gentlemen, we're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on Syria. Stay with RT. Welcome back to Crosstalk. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're talking about the Syrian civil war. If I go back to you, Carl, in London, many in Western media and politicians are talking about an end game in Syria. What is that end? I mean, Assad goes and everyone lives happily ever after? I mean, what does the end mean?
Well, that's the real problem. It's the question. I mean, in my next column I'm writing is, what is an end game in Syria? How do you define that? Because they're making mistaken analogies with places like Egypt and Tunisia, where you can just sideline the president and then kind of the system can continue in a different way. In Syria, it's a radically different situation. If Bashar al-Assad leaves tomorrow, another person will step in. There's a much wider circle that has this power interest. So ultimately, even if you're talking about the higher echelons of the regime actually leaving, you're going to have to arrive at a political kind of solution that allows that transition to happen and allows like the Alawi community, the Christian minorities, all of these people not to feel threatened by whatever is coming. So that idea that we'll keep the pressure and then one day Bashar al-Assad will just leave, that's not going to happen in Syria. There's a much more different power structure in there. And what we really need to look at is what is the political solution. And here's the failure of what has become the de facto political representative of the Syrian uprising, the Syrian National Council, which is an utter failure. It doesn't have any command of any power on the ground, doesn't have any political authority, and doesn't have any imagination to come up with a solution or even offer any kind of transitional plan. So even if we're talking about military successes on the ground for the uprising, that's actually even more dangerous in absence of a form of political control that knows what it's aiming for. So I fear that's kind of a very bleak picture, and this talk of an end game is a bit of a hype at the moment without that political clarity.
Majid, if I can go to you in Los Angeles, if Assad were to suddenly go, would you worry about a bloodbath, ethnic cleansing?
Well, I think we need a peaceful transition to a more democratic system of governance.
A civil war, you don't usually get a peaceful transition. We're in a civil war.
Well, I think Well, I think what is going to happen for weeks and months to come, I think the basic stalemate that we're witnessing now, it's going to continue. I think neither the opposition or local oppositional groups, the rebels or the government can win this battle. There is an international stalemate, and I think this will continue for the months to come, and many, probably more young people will become radicalized. They will see their relatives being killed, and they may take more guns and to defend themselves. And you would see also the government using more force to quell this rebellion. So I think this remains to be seen how the transition is going to work.
Well, Majid, if I can stay with you in Los Angeles, does this bode well for a democratic future?
Well, I think if Assad, I think if he now allows a more, as I mentioned, a peaceful transition, you might see. I mean, you might see different groups coming together, and now the secular, the Muslim Brotherhood, all different groups has to come together and create a pluralistic society. But I don't see that to be happening soon.
Okay, Stephen, if I can go to you. It's very interesting, the Assad regime said they have chemical weapons. Do you think that's going to make the West hesitate a little bit, NATO? Because we keep hearing something must be done.
Well, the West brought up the subject. Well, this is all hype, Peter. This is hype. And the West brought up the subject of chemical weapons. A lot of countries have chemical weapons. I deplore them. Biological weapons, nuclear weapons. There is no country with a greater arsenal of weapons of mass destruction in the region than Israel. It's well known, it's acknowledged. They have a huge stockpile of nuclear weapons, delivery systems that can send them far distant from Israel. They have chemical weapons, and they use them, Peter. They've used them in Lebanon. They've used biological weapons. They use them against the Palestinians in Gaza, in Cast Lead. And doctors have treated the injured and the dead, and they've seen injuries they never saw before from the weapons that Israel uses, and Israel tests new weapons in its wars. Where's the condemnation of Israel? Where is the condemnation? Where's the condemnation of the occupation? It's a very distorted picture, and how this ends, I have no idea. But it could end if Washington called off its dogs. But once you unleash them, it's not so simple. And I must tell you, I just learned about this, and I don't know very much about it, and I can't substantiate it, but I've heard stories that these so-called rebels that are being enlisted from regional countries, they're mostly coming in from outside, not inside. They're being told that they're going into Syria to fight Israeli forces, not Syrian forces. Can you imagine that? Why would one Arab want to go to war with another Arab? But you tell them that Israel has got its army in Syria, and these people think they're going on a mission to liberate Syria from Israel.
Well, it's interesting.
That's a powerful
I'd like to go to Carl. Israel's been mentioned
fight.
here. We hear the Israeli government is prepared to intervene in Syria. What do you think about that?
Well, I think, again, you look at Israel today, and it's kind of a similar symptoms to what happening with the U.S., but much more exaggerated in that it can only see the world through this very paranoid, security-obsessed perspective. And it was quite interesting that when they asked Ehud Barak and Shimon Peres about the theoretical possibility of some Syrian refugees escaping to Israel, and they said, absolutely not, we're not going to receive them, which is a kind of a very telling situation. They've been selling us all this empty talk for months about how sympathetic to the Syrian people they are. But of course, it's empty rhetoric. And now they've sort of found a hook, them and the American, that there's a hook to the American crisis. And this is why I say we have to be very attentive to this level of meddling that's kind of completely irrational almost. Once they found the security hook, the same story of WMD that we heard with Saddam Hussein before, they're not deterred. Suddenly, they're sort of interested. There's an angle in it for us. And it's done out of complete paranoia. So I think for both countries, but particularly for the States, because it's the one that drives the policies, I disagree completely with Stephen. They didn't unleash this power. In fact, there's lots of debate in Washington now and lots of reluctance to supply weapons because they know it might end up in the hands of Al-Qaeda. But at the same time, this level of persistent meddling and allowing their allies to meddle consistently and kind of fueling the fire in Syria is very, very destructive. And adding this component of the chemical weapons is only going to muddy the picture. The big picture now is the Syrian people should be allowed to decide their fate for themselves. We don't have direct military intervention, but we have all sorts of destructive foreign meddling that needs to stop, and Syria shouldn't be treated as a kind of a regional international playground for all these players to settle their scores.
Majid, if I can go to you in Los Angeles, the chemical weapons, you think that could be a hook for the U.S. and Israel to strike?